At 15 minutes past 8, on the morning of August 6, 1945, the sky above the Japanese city of Hiroshima produced a light that no city had ever seen. A single American bomber, so high it was barely a glint, released a single bomb. 43 seconds later, 600 meters above the rooftops, it detonated. In an instant, a city of 350,000 people ceased, in any meaningful sense, to exist. You know this story. Everyone knows this story. It may be the most told story of the 20th century. But this film is not about the bomb. It is about what happened to the story itself, in the weeks, months, and decades after the flash. Because almost everything the world was allowed to know about Hiroshima passed through a filter. Photographs were confiscated. Newsreels were seized, shipped across the ocean, and locked in vaults for a quarter of a century. Japanese newspapers were forbidden to describe what was happening in their own country. A strange new illness was officially declared enemy propaganda. And the men who filmed the truth resorted to hiding their negatives in ceilings and under floorboards, inside an occupied country from the occupiers. This is the story of the Great Silencing, how the most photographed catastrophe of its age became, for 25 years, the least seen. It begins with the silence of the first hours, a silence that was not imposed by anyone. It was physical. The bomb had destroyed the telephone exchanges, the telegraph lines, the radio station. Hiroshima simply stopped answering. In Tokyo, 300 kilometers away, operators kept trying the lines and hearing nothing. The first reports came from neighboring towns, a flash, an enormous cloud, refugees speaking of a city that was no longer there. The military sent a plane. The officer aboard, still 100 kilometers out, saw the smoke rising higher than his aircraft flew. And below it, where a city should have been, a burning plane. For one day, the silence of Hiroshima belonged to no one. Then, very quickly, powerful men on both sides of the Pacific began to decide what the silence would say. The first battle was over a disease. Within days of the blast, doctors in Hiroshima's improvised clinics began seeing something they could not explain. People who had survived the explosion without a scratch, who had walked out of the ruins, helped their neighbors, felt fine, began, 1 and 2 weeks later, to sicken. Their hair fell out. Purple spots bloomed on their skin. Their gums bled. Their white blood cells collapsed, and many of them died. The doctors, cut off from the world, had no name for it. They called it the mysterious disease. We know its name now, acute radiation syndrome. The bomb had not finished killing on August 6th. On September 2nd, Japan formally surrendered. The very next day, a rumpled Australian war correspondent named Wilfred Burchett did something no Western reporter had done. He boarded a train, alone, armed with a typewriter, 7 rations of food and a pistol, and rode 20 hours through the wreckage of Japan to see Hiroshima for himself. What he found, he typed sitting on a chunk of rubble in the ruins. His dispatch ran on the front page of a London newspaper on September 5th. It described a city that looked not bombed but erased, and people dying, weeks after the blast, from something he could only call an atomic plague. He framed the story explicitly as a warning to the entire world. The reaction from the American military was swift, not to investigate the claim, but to bury it. Burchett's press accreditation was revoked. His camera, containing film of the ruined city, disappeared. He was ordered out of Japan, and officials publicly suggested he had fallen for Japanese propaganda, that the so-called radiation sickness was an invention designed to win sympathy for a defeated aggressor. And to make sure the official version had a voice, there was already a man in place. The science reporter of the New York Times, William Lawrence, the only journalist who had witnessed the secret Trinity test, had been, for months, quietly on the payroll of the Manhattan Project itself, writing its press releases while covering it as news. That September, his newspaper ran his reassurances that the ruins held no lingering radiation worth speaking of. The following year, his reporting on the bomb won the Pulitzer Prize. Inside Japan, the machinery of silence became official. In September 1945, the occupation authorities issued what was called the Press Code, a set of rules for every Japanese newspaper, magazine, radio station, and publisher. On paper, it banned reports that might disturb public tranquility or spread false rumor. In practice, its censors, thousands of them, reading everything from front pages to poetry journals, developed a special sensitivity to one subject above all: the atomic bombs and what they had done to human beings. Reports on radiation sickness disappeared from Japanese newspapers. Medical researchers in Hiroshima and Nagasaki found they could not publish their clinical findings. Data that might have helped doctors treat the dying circulated only in locked drawers. Photographs of the ruined cities were seized. Even literature fell under the blade. Survivors who wrote poems and memoirs about that morning saw them banned, delayed for years, or cut beyond recognition. An entire nation was forbidden to describe, in public, the thing that had happened to it. The censorship did not announce itself. That was its genius. Publications were not stamped as censored. Forbidden material simply never appeared, and writers, never told exactly where the line was, learned to stop short of it on their own. The occupation called this maintaining order. Later scholars would call it something else, the management of memory. And the deepest layer of that management concerned not words, but images. In the autumn of 1945, a Japanese newsreel company called Nippon Eigasha, Nichie, dispatched camera crews to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 4 months, more than 30 cameramen and technicians filmed the two cities with a documentarian's discipline: the seared plain where the city center had been, the shadows burned onto stone, the hospitals, the schools, the twisted steel of the exhibition hall dome beside the river. They understood precisely what they were doing. Some of them said it aloud. No one would believe this without film. They were building evidence for the future. In December 1945, American military police arrived at the project. Filming was to stop. The footage was to be handed over. All of it. The Nichie film, nearly 3 hours of edited footage, tens of thousands of feet of negative, the only comprehensive Japanese film record of the atomic aftermath, was boxed, labeled, and shipped to the United States. There it was classified secret and locked away. It would not return to Japan for more than 2 decades. Japanese audiences, including the survivors themselves, would not see their own catastrophe on their own screens for a generation. But the confiscation was not quite complete. And this is where the story turns. Members of the Japanese crew, anticipating the seizure, had secretly struck a duplicate print of part of the footage. In the last days before the handover, they hid it. Reels were concealed in a laboratory ceiling. Other materials were quietly scattered among trusted colleagues. For years, through the entire occupation, a handful of film technicians kept the hidden print safe, knowing that its discovery could mean prison. In an occupied country, they ran a private archive of forbidden memory, waiting for a future in which it could be shown. Meanwhile, the Americans were filming too, and censoring themselves. In 1946, a United States military survey team arrived with something the Japanese crews had not had: color film. Lieutenant Daniel McGovern and his colleagues shot hour after hour of large-format color footage in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the ruins, the hospitals, the survivors. It remains the only substantial color record of the aftermath. McGovern would later say plainly why it vanished. The authorities did not want the human effects of the bomb shown, and so the footage was classified and buried. Roughly 90,000 feet of color film went into storage on the American East Coast, marked secret, and stayed there. Not for years, but for decades. The men who shot it spent the rest of their careers quietly asking what had become of it, and being told, in effect, nothing has become of it. It does not exist for you. 2 archives, then. One hidden in a Japanese ceiling from the Americans. One hidden in American vaults from everyone. By the summer of 1946, the official version of Hiroshima had settled comfortably into place. In the American imagination, the bomb was a mushroom cloud photographed from a safe distance, a triumph of physics that had ended the war and saved lives. What happened under the cloud remained, for the public, an abstraction of flattened buildings. The dying had no faces, and officially, the radiation deaths barely existed. That May, the head of the Manhattan Project, General Leslie Groves, had gone as far as telling a Senate committee that doctors assured him death from radiation was, in his words, a very pleasant way to die. Then, at the end of August 1946, a magazine in New York quietly detonated the official version. The New Yorker gave over an entire issue. No cartoons, no other articles, nothing. To a single piece of reporting by a war correspondent named John Hersey. It was called, simply, Hiroshima. Hersey had done what the communiques never did. He told the story through 6 ordinary people: a clerk, a widowed seamstress, 2 doctors, a German priest, a young Japanese pastor, following them minute by minute from the flash onward. There was no editorializing, just what happened to named human beings, one after another. The issue sold out within hours. Newspapers fought for reprint rights. The text was read aloud, in full, over American radio. The book version has never gone out of print. For millions of Americans, it was the first time Hiroshima had human faces, and the first time they learned, in plain language, about the sickness that kept killing after the war was over. Hersey could publish what Japanese doctors could not, for a simple reason. The occupation's censorship ruled Japan, not Manhattan. The military's response was telling. Inside Japan, the article was suppressed. A Japanese translation of Hiroshima would not be permitted for years. The truth, it turned out, was directional. It could flow toward American readers as a sensation. It could not be allowed to flow back to the people it described. And for the survivors themselves, the silence had one more layer, perhaps the strangest of all. In 1947, the United States established a research organization in Hiroshima, the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. Its clinics, up on a hill overlooking the city, invited survivors in for examinations. Blood counts, measurements, photographs, questions. The data flowed into one of the largest medical studies ever undertaken, a study that continues, under a joint successor institution, to this day, and that underpins much of what the world knows about radiation and the human body. But the commission operated under a policy that survivors never forgot. It studied them and did not treat them. A survivor could be examined for hours, her illness documented in meticulous American files, and then be sent home with nothing. The reasoning was official and cold. Treatment might look like atonement. To many in Hiroshima, the message was simpler. We are interesting to them, one survivor famously put it, as specimens. So the pattern held, year after year. The world's most studied patients, forbidden the world's attention. A country's own newsreels, sitting in a foreign vault. Doctors publishing nothing, poets shelving manuscripts, and a hidden duplicate print gathering dust above a laboratory ceiling. In April 1952, the occupation ended, and with it the press code. Japan could finally speak, and it did. Within months, Japanese magazines published the first major photo spreads of the aftermath, images the public had never seen, 7 years after the event, landed like news. The hidden Nichii print came down from the ceiling, and pieces of the forbidden footage finally reached Japanese screens, folded into documentaries whose audiences sat in stunned silence. The long-suppressed poems and memoirs came out. What had been unsayable became, almost overnight, a national literature. But the master materials, the full confiscated newsreel archive, and all of the American color footage were still in the United States, still classified. And there they stayed, while the men who had shot them grew old, asking for them back. The campaign to free the footage took a form the censors had never planned for: paperwork, persistence, and shame. Through the 1960s, Japanese journalists, scholars, and film professionals, including veterans of the original Nichii crews, pressed the American government to return what had been taken. Petitions were organized. Questions were asked in Parliament. Newspaper campaigns kept the demand alive. In 1967, Washington finally relented. In part, the confiscated Japanese footage was returned to Japan the following year. Even then, the homecoming was managed. When excerpts first aired on Japanese television, the most direct human material was held back, and survivors groups had to fight a second battle, this time with their own broadcasters, over how much of the truth their country could bear to see. The American color footage took even longer. It sat in its vaults through Vietnam, through the moon landings, through détente, officially declassified at various points, practically invisible, because no one with power had any interest in showing it. It was not until the late 1970s and 1980s that researchers and filmmakers, tipped off by the aging cameramen themselves, began prying the reels loose, foot by foot. When portions finally aired, 4 decades after they were filmed, reviewers kept reaching for the same startled phrase, "We have never seen this before." Think about that sentence. The most consequential single act of destruction in modern history, filmed in color by the American government itself, and the world had never seen it. Not because the film was lost, because it was kept. The men who shot it never recovered the years. The Nichia cameramen who hid their print risked prison to preserve a record their own government's conquerors wanted erased. Several did not live to see it shown. Daniel McGovern, the American officer who filmed in color and spent decades tracking his own confiscated work through the archives, put the reason for the burial simply. They did not want that material shown because it revealed what the weapon truly did. There is a common defense of all this, and it deserves to be stated fairly. The occupation authorities were governing a shattered, starving country of 70 million people, and they feared that images of the bombs would feed resentment, destabilize the occupation, perhaps poison the peace. The censorship, in this telling, was not a cover-up, but crowd control. Temporary, pragmatic, even benevolent, perhaps. But notice what the policy actually protected. It did not protect Japanese citizens from knowledge of the bombing. They were living in it. It protected the bomb's reputation. For a decade in which the United States built its arsenal and its strategy around nuclear weapons, the American public's picture of what those weapons did to human bodies remained a mushroom cloud seen from 30,000 feet. The one thing the vaults reliably contained was the view from the ground, and the silencing had a cost that can be measured in more than memory. Japanese doctors' suppressed studies were, in those first years, the world's only clinical data on mass radiation exposure. The censorship did not only manage a story, it slowed medicine. Today, the Genbaku Dome, the skeletal exhibition hall the cameramen filmed in that first autumn, still stands beside the river in Hiroshima, preserved exactly as the blast left it, a World Heritage Site visited by millions. The footage is free now. The photographs are in museums. The poems are in school books. It all looks inevitable, as if the truth had simply surfaced on its own, the way truth is supposed to. It did not surface. It was carried in a ceiling for 7 years by film technicians who could have gone to prison. It was pried loose, reel by old cameramen writing letters to archives. It was smuggled into print by one magazine that gambled its entire issue on a single story. Hiroshima taught the world what a nuclear weapon does. The years after Hiroshima taught a quieter lesson, that the first casualty of the atomic age was not truth itself. Truth is stubborn, but the speed of truth. Buried evidence eventually climbs out of the vault. The question the 20th century kept asking, and the 21st has not stopped asking, is how much happens in the world while it climbs? If they buried this, what else did they bury?